Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me. I'm excited to visit with you. I went back in my notes and I saw I was here shortly after first being appointed when this administration first began, and that was about 135 weeks ago, but nobody's counting. And that's about 107 weeks, 2 days, and X number of hours and minutes from the beginning of a second term of this administration. And when I was here, I spoke about four very important things, and they were things that I committed to the governor, to the public, and of course to myself and my immediate staff, that these are the four things I'm going to do my entire time as secretary. And should the public accept what they are and what this administration has done, we'll have an opportunity for phase 2 of these. Some of them may be the same, but I think it's important that you have some consistency in what you get out of public service. And so for me, those simple things are what I call my 4 PowerPoints. And I'm known for PowerPoint presentations, and I have one, but I'm not sharing it on the screen. But we're going to just talk about it. And those 4 things are making a case for new revenue here in the state of Louisiana. As you know, it's been nearly 3 decades, if not longer, that we've had real infusions of dollars into our infrastructure. We talked about taking full advantage of our federal resources. And as you know, a part of your gas tax goes to the federal government. And it comes back to the state in a number of ways. One is a formula, the other is in discretionary areas. And so we wanted to take advantage of that because the federal government has moved to a much more discretionary environment than we've ever seen before. And then we talked about number 3, having a balanced transportation agenda, talking about all modes of transportation because we are all integrated. I can't deal with just highways, I can't deal with just rails, I can't deal with just runways, I can't ignore the waterways, I can't discount the freight environment and what all that means, and I can't discount Mutt and Jeff, as we used to say, the left and the right foot, and how pedestrians exist in our communities and how best to keep them safe in those efforts. And then last but certainly not least, over my years in government, I've learned the importance of being more collaborative with legislators, being more collaborative with stakeholder groups, but most importantly, being more collaborative with local governments. Because I own, as the State Department of Transportation, I own 16,000+ miles of road that exist in communities all across this state. And so if we're going to make decisions that affect those communities, I want to be collaborative in those and not assume that we know what's best. And so thinking about what I talked about a little over 120 weeks ago, I thought it was important to go back and say, what have we done in those areas before we talk about how do we go forward in the future of transportation. First, when you talk about making the case for new revenue, I can tell you the one most important thing that we were able to do on day one is protect the Transportation Trust Fund as best we can and eliminate diversions as best we could in an environment, as you know, where we had significant budget deficits and challenges there. And so we're excited to say that we've done that and we continue to maintain that. We've invested over $1.7 billion in infrastructure since 2016, and we've done some fascinating things when it comes to innovation here in the state of Louisiana. And so in order to make a case for revenue, you have to show responsibility. You have to show that you are making good and wise decisions. Outside of the natural disasters that we've seen in August and March of 2016, I have to think about the daily routine, hurricane evacuation, freezes, ice events, having closed every interstate here in the state of Louisiana because of weather since I've been secretary. Having to close the bridge in Grand Isle, Louisiana because of ice is different. And so from the state's perspective, we have to be responsible to the citizens for that, but we've also taken on some really aggressive efforts. I can talk about the design build process from Highland to 73, which was one of the fastest that we've ever done because that project was unique and the department had already been working on that. I can talk about the Garvey Bond initiative where we're doing Barksdale project and we're doing Loyola and we're going to widen I-10 from the bridge to the split. All of those are innovative solutions that have been tools for some time. But more importantly, those projects have been on the list for the last 20 years that we've not been able to do. So we've made a case for new revenue in that we've not said, here is what is a priority of this administration. Our priority was, as Governor Edwards said, let's put Louisiana first, and said, let's do the things that we know we need to do. So the second one was, how do we take advantage of federal funds? Well, I'm happy to tell you, I talked a little bit about the Fast Lane grant that we got in the first part of this administration. That was about $60 million. And then we followed up with another federal grant that was competitive. We got $45 million for our first public-private partnership. We were one of 23 states, and I think we have the highest percentage of what we asked for being awarded. We asked for $50 million and we got 45. That does not happen around the country. And more importantly, we've been able to take advantage of what we call federal redistribution dollars. Every year we've increased. Last year it was $60 million. We hope to get up to $80 million this year in monies that are reallocated to states from other states that may not have advanced as much of their funds. And so when you say we are bringing home the dollars that we send and then some, I can tell you we've got over $100 million of money in the budget this year to work in Louisiana that was not expected to be here. And when you talk about the third PowerPoint, which is having a balanced transportation system, I can tell you we've doubled the Port Priority Program in year 1 and year 2. And we've created an Office of Multimodal Commerce that is working with businesses and industries all across the state of Louisiana. We've also taken an effort of working with our federal government to deliver public works infrastructure, meaning we've more than doubled our statewide flood control program from $8 million up to $20 million in this year. And having been in the department for many years prior to being secretary, I knew firsthand that communities around this state struggle with dealing with public works. We struggle with dealing with public works, and $8 million wasn't enough. And it took a 500-year flood and a 1,000-year flood, whatever the numbers were, to make that case. And $20 million is still not enough. Because we announced that doubling, we had over $100 million of applications from local government. So we're excited about that. We're also excited about having worked with our congressional delegation to fund projects like the Co-Meet Diversion Project, something that's been on the books for many, many years, but something that is now fully funded. We put together a plan that had a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C for funding, and we've got a hybrid of that, and at the end of the day, we expect to have that project started next year and then finished 4 years after that. And then last, in terms of having a balanced transportation, there are those who might say passenger rail is not a priority or is not important. Well, we think it is, but we have to put it in context. This state, this governor, this administration put forth a $10 million effort to collaborate with Mississippi and Alabama to restore Gulf Coast rail between Mobile and New Orleans from an evacuation standpoint, and something that occurred pre-Katrina as a daily routine for mobility for folks. Folks that might not have a car, folks that might have a car, folks that might want to fly from the airport. We were the only state to provide its share of dollars to be able to match a federal grant. We're not foolish enough to think that we can afford it all by ourselves right now, but we put forth that effort to say, let's actually compete to try and bring that to fruition. And so when you think about other mobility solutions, I can think about that. I can also think about our effort to help bring bicycles to the Baton Rouge area with a bike share program that the department is happy to be helping to launch here in the Baton Rouge region. So when you think about being more collaborative, we talk about the 800 projects we've led, the 2,700 miles in communities, and the infra success. All of those things occurred with public input. Those are things that we've made modifications to, a roundabout here or a turn lane there. Things that we've made safer in Livonia because of that public engagement. As secretary, I spent a great deal of time with our folks in public meetings, talking to folks, giving them a face that can be held accountable for decisions that the department makes, and we're excited about that. And not only are they participating in giving us their ideas, the Garvey package that we talked about, every one of those projects have local dollars invested in it. It's not just saying we want you to build this. We're saying here's $12 million in Bossier. Here's $12 million in New Orleans. Here's $12 million in Bellchase. Here's $24 million in Baton Rouge to help deliver these types of projects. And so we're excited about that. And everything I've talked to you about have been really good success stories, but there's one that we weren't so successful with, and that's with the truck permit overhaul. We made a valiant effort to fix it the right way. We weren't successful, but folks are still having those conversations. When you think about a freight industry and a freight community like Louisiana, you have to think about those that are moving things through Louisiana and that are moving things to and from Louisiana and how they all fit together. We see all across the state, the 12,000 bridges I have, the Port of Baton Rouge can't be successful if I can't get timber out of a forest in North Louisiana to get to a barge, to get to a chipper, to get to the Port of Baton Rouge. And so if that bridge at the farthest extent of that relationship doesn't work, the trees are going to stay in the forest and not make it to the port to get overseas for energy. And so we have to think about infrastructure in a very comprehensive way. So we talked about all the things that we've done well. So let's talk a little bit about the future of transportation in Louisiana. I see Secretary LaBagh is here, and we, over the years, saw our backlog decrease because of one-time investment. Well, as I stand here today, our backlog is creeping back up slowly but surely to what it was when I got there with the Blanco administration, up to $14 billion. And for the general public, that $14 billion are things that we have to do to maintain a state of good repair, things that are already built. That's not the new bridge. That's not the widened interstate. Those projects are on our wish list, and that's about $15 billion here in the state of Louisiana. So all told, you're looking at about $30 billion of things that we need in infrastructure. Now in 2017, you may remember we made a very valiant attempt, and this may be naivete on my part, but I'm committed to getting it right so we don't have to do it all over again. We put forth a very bold gas tax proposal that would have right-sized the gas tax. The 17 cents that we talked about wasn't necessarily an increase. It brings you up to where we would have been had we indexed the gas tax in 1989. That is so very important because all of the other states except for 3 have adjusted their gas tax since that time. All of those states have made continual investments in their infrastructure, unlike Louisiana. So not only are our needs increasing, but the quality of what we have right now is decreasing, which is only going to increase the cost that we have to make. And so when you think about the $700 to $800 million a year that we get from the federal government, if they do not fix the deficit that's existing in the Highway Trust Fund, the federal government will see a $35 billion reduction in what they send back to states. Now, what that simply means for those who aren't mathematicians like me is that $800 million I get every year, it's going to shrink. That's the reality. They no longer have the resources to invest the way they had been doing it previously. And what that shrinkage is going to be, what that number is going to be, depends on what efforts they make at the federal level. And there's all kinds of discussions. In the most recent discussion, as we talked about infrastructure in this administration, the presidential administration, when they first started, they talked about wanting to spend trillions of dollars in infrastructure. Today, we see a little bit of effort. We see some policy solutions roll out, but we aren't seeing real dollars. That's the challenge. And Chairman Schuster has introduced a very interesting concept, which is to raise the gas tax and the diesel tax for 10 years, but prevent you from ever charging another national gas tax again. And he would replace it with something yet to be determined, which is hugely risky. Now, it's going to force a conversation, but it's hugely risky given where we are in our country when we travel America's roads and then we go look overseas and see how far behind we are in terms of mobility, in terms of quality of work, in terms of how many people are moving across that and how we pay for it. And at the state level, we will continue to have the same challenges in terms of how we match those federal funds. As we said to the legislature and the public 2 years ago, we're going to have a hard time meeting our current match responsibilities with the current level of funding. And as it stands today, we're using close to $30 million in what are toll credits to help make us whole. Should we get that $80 million, we're not going to have any toll credits left. And we're going to be forced into a conversation of what the governor has attempted to do was make a real investment in transportation with capital outlay funds. For the first time, this administration, I didn't mention this earlier, invested money to match highway trust funds by giving it straight to the Transportation Trust Fund. That is the system, that is the adopted plan for project selection and moving things through. Those numbers are going to dwindle because of the difficulty in meeting the obligations of capital outlay with that $300 million a year. So where do we go in terms of connected vehicles? Where do we go in terms of mobility solutions? You won't go very far unless you have the base element of what you need, which is a local revenue stream. When you think about public-private partnerships, I cannot promise the world for tolling if I can't make up the other 60% of a new bridge in Baton Rouge. That is the scenario. I can't widen I-49 or build the intercity connector with a concept of a P-free because that's not how it's going to happen. They're going to need to get a return on their investment, and I have to have the full funding before I obligate that. And so as we go into another legislative session, I can't promise you that there's going to be a solution, but I don't know that we have an alternative to investing in infrastructure that's going to be sustainable in the long term. And it brings me back to where we were in 2017. If you don't have the right number, if you don't spend it the right way, the public will continue to distrust how we will spend our dollars. And you can look no farther than having a legislative process to identify projects as opposed to identifying projects and spending money as they are prepared to be spent. And so I think the solution to the future of Louisiana's infrastructure is doing what we've already done. We've made good decisions. We've invested in projects that we've all agreed, for the most part, that we need. Maybe not the finer components of what it's going to look like through Baton Rouge, but we all agree that it needs to be widened. We all agree that there needs to be a new bridge. We all agree that protecting Barksdale is the way to go. We all agree that public-private partnerships are a tool. We've got all the tools. We've got all the projects. We've got all the expertise to make it happen. What we don't have is the fuel in our tank, i.e. the dollars, to deliver those things that the public is saying they want. And as Secretary, I will always be honest and frank with folks. I will always tell them what the realities are, and we will continue to close bridges if we have to make them safe. And we will continue to spend one-time money on the interstates to build them, because that's where the masses of people are going to be. And so as you travel from Lafayette down to Ascension, you'll see no less than 10 or 12 cranes on major widenings. It's all one-time money. It's all one-time money. It's not a sustainable revenue source. And so I don't believe that the future of transportation in Louisiana is going to be one-time money. I think it's got to be something sustainable. I think it's got to be meaningful, and it's got to follow national best practices in terms of how you allocate it. And so I know I wanted to talk about so much more, and maybe having a PowerPoint would keep me on track, but I think that's the future of Louisiana. We've got a tough decision to make. Maurice Lauricella, I think, is a cartoonist who did a picture of me. It was a much broader picture of me that I laugh about in the office, but it says we've deferred our infrastructure costs for far too long. And I think the longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be. The longer we wait, the more difficult it's going to be. And I look no further than widening I-10. I think this is our third time trying to make it through that process. Never before have we had $350 million put on it. That will save the rural program, because we're going to only use $67 million a year to spread out that pain across the state. And in fact, in the rural areas for the next 12 years with Garvey, we're going to spend more money overlaying it the way the budget partition works. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to provide those solutions, and it's an even more exciting opportunity to stand here and take questions from the folks in the press. So with that, I'll be happy to entertain any questions. Yes, sir.
Tolls on the bridges everywhere in Louisiana. Something like that, obligated. People paying when they're getting on the bridges.
His question is about tolls in Louisiana, and have we considered that? The answer is absolutely yes. This administration's position is that tolls should be on the table where they are feasible and where they work. With tolls, you need a critical mass of people. With tolls, you need to provide a value for that service. Meaning, if I'm going to pay a toll to cross this bridge, I'm going to save X amount of time on the normal route without that toll. So there's got to be a value for that. And there's a model that we look at. I can tell you the bridge south of here, the next bridge we build across Mississippi, it needs to be tolled. The numbers using best practices are going to tell you 30 to 40% of the revenue needed to build that bridge can come from tolls. I can't build it with that, and that's over a 30-year period. So I still need the other 60% to make it happen. I can show you the LA1, the 415 connector, another great idea. It has about a 25 to 30% toll feasibility. It's going to save 5 minutes of time on LA1 once it's rebuilt. That's not a business model that's going to be sustainable from a banking or a financial perspective. So tolls can work on I-10, on Calcasieu, tolls can work on Jimmy Davis Bridge, but you have to put it in perspective. And on the LA23 project, we've got about $80 million in hand. We still need about $40 million of tolls to make that project whole. No project around the country is ever going to be built like it once was with a check from the federal government.
Shawn, on the bond commission decision, what is your response to the
Yes, there is a possibility. Now, I will also tell you, I think there's 15 or 20 other banks out there. And so without getting into a Second Amendment debate as a hunter and a gun owner in my home, I see the decision that the Bond Commission made in very practical terms, and I shared this with my son this weekend. I said, he asked me what was the effect of that. I said, it's equivalent to us building a house and not being able to buy any materials or supplies from Home Depot or Lowe's because they control a big part of the market. So I can go to the local store, I can go to another store in another city that's under another brand, but it's going to potentially cost me more and cost in terms of the quality of what we get. I can't criticize their decision. They have the right to make those decisions. But I will also tell you, many of the banks out there, particularly the two that are no longer allowed to advance in this process, did a great number of Garvey issuances. And so they're not the only ones who can do it. I'm still confident that we're going to deliver this package the way we should. And if it's going to cost us a little bit more in the end, then that's the nature of infrastructure. We can look at projects today and say if we built it 10 years ago, I would have saved 6 or 7%. So I think it's going to be the same effect on the money that we borrow. We are still committed to having those debts paid out in 12 years. And we had some leeway built in that dollar figure that will manage that. We can take advantage of a lower cost on Barksdale, maybe a lower cost on Loyola that can make us whole on the I-10 project.
You mentioned up on that, Shawn. Is there a possibility that if the banks decide to litigate this process, that could delay the Garvey bond?
I don't know that it's a possibility they can litigate. The question is Will's question, just for the record, was the effect of the decision at the Bond Commission detrimental, I guess, to the Garvey project? And this next question is, if the banks decided to litigate that, would that hold us up? My answer is yes, they have that opportunity to litigate. Not being an attorney, I don't understand all the mechanics of whether or not that would hold us up because there are other banks out there that are able to do this. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the importance of being collaborative with local governments. The Metro Council moved forward a proposal for the mayor's traffic tax plan to be put on the ballot in December. If that were to pass, would that collaboration be made easier with the traffic issues that we have here in Baton Rouge?
So the question is the Baton Rouge traffic proposal that's being put forth to the people consistent with a collaborative agenda between the department and the locals? And I would say absolutely it is. Because a part of their project is addressing projects that are important to travelers. Citizens don't care who owns a bridge. They don't care who is responsible for a road if there's congestion. They want to get through. They want to get across that structure. And so I appreciate all of our communities who have invested in this community has done a great deal at investing in state-owned roads because it's a solution for their residents. At the very beginning, we've often said that locals should have the authority to invest in their infrastructure in a way that makes sense for them and their communities, provided it does not affect the state's ability to deliver those projects. Then I think we have no reason to disrespect or disregard what that public decision is. So I don't see any challenge to the collaboration between locals and the state as a result of a local investment. We work together on projects on a regular basis. Fred and I were on the phone last week talking about issues and projects. We're still committed to working with them on the PQ interchange that we think we're going to be able to fund a major portion out of that. $80 million we hope to get, so that collaboration will always be there if the leadership sees fit.
The opponents to the tax measure that you mentioned a couple of years ago cited as one of the reasons for the opposition inefficiency of DOTD and threw out a figure of 11% as being the amount of state taxes that was spent on actual concrete and bridge construction. Garrett Graves reinforced that figure. Jay Darden was a guest here sometime back. He said he didn't have a clue what the percentage is. Can you give us the current day approximate percentage of state-funded gasoline taxes that are spent on actual bridge and road construction?
Yes, I can explain the difference, I guess, or the question is about the 11% and how much of state gas taxes are spent actually on a project. Let me preface this by saying the $800 million I get from the federal government comes with strings. And the strings is that you've got to have a 20% match or a 10% match. Some of that can be 100% for the safety projects and the type there are. So a portion of our state gas taxes are used to provide that necessary 10% or 20% match on that $800 million. And that comes to anywhere from 10 to 13%. The remaining portion of our obligations, none of the federal funds can be used for the operation and maintenance of the existing system. So the portion that remains is what we use to take care of the existing system. The mowing, the lights, the cable barrier replacements, guardrail replacements, hurricane response, all of the other things that we do other than construction is paid for out of the state gas tax. And that's the model that every other state in the nation uses. It would be foolish of me to take 100% of my state money to go build something and not be able to take care of it, and use 100% of the federal money to go build something else and not be able to take care of it. And so we're following the national best practice model and the requirement of law that says you have to do your due diligence to take care of what you've built, and your stewardship agreement says you have to maintain these other things that we no longer at the federal government pay for. People tend to take infrastructure for granted and assume somebody's going to cut the grass. They will, and that comes with a cost. Someone has to pay the utility bill for that signal head. That's a cost to the state. Those aren't things that the federal government is going to maintain. Neither are the things like dewatering interstates and de-icing roads. That's all coming out of the state's responsibility in terms of what we have to maintain. Yes, ma'am.
Realistically, how long could the I-10 expansion project take?
Realistically, you can be anywhere from 5 to 7 years. What I will tell you, the most important thing is to imagine segments of independent utility, meaning I have to build this interstate and maintain traffic the entire time. And so it's going to be done in phases that make absolute sense. But when we finish a segment, we want you to be able to use that segment. When you finish the next segment, that's more capacity for you to use in that segment. And so it could be anywhere from 5 to 7 years. We hope to take full advantage of the private sector innovation using CMAR or design build or some of the other tools that might accelerate that. But again, all of that comes with a cost in terms of what we have to have. We are looking forward to our public meetings that start next week. We're going to have public meetings on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to really share with the public where we are today in terms of that project. And I will tell you, I don't think we've ever been this close to what is the holy grail of traffic solutions in Louisiana. Port of New Orleans says their biggest issue is getting through Baton Rouge. And so we've got a corridor that has $350+ million on it, that we have 90% of the right-of-way, and the only thing that's standing between us and them is the final decision to go. And I tell you, if we can provide every project with a pot of money on the front end, some of our decisions will be easier because the public will see a serious commitment to delivering infrastructure. If we didn't have any dollars on it, I don't know that the public would be willing to accept some of the decisions that are going to have to be made in terms of this corridor. Yes, sir.
Help me a little bit. Who is legally responsible for the interstate maintenance and expansion? Is it the state of Louisiana, the federal government, or is it a combination?
You would be surprised. The question is help explain the ownership issues of the interstate. The federal government owns very little interstate. They own very little infrastructure. Most of the infrastructure in this country is owned at the local level, i.e. the state. So when the federal government came along 50 years ago because the president had this great idea, and it was an absolutely phenomenal idea at the time, was let's go build an interstate to do interstate commerce, to help with our military defense, to get people going. The purposes have changed, but the federal government's role has changed as well in terms of how they reinvest. And so when you talk about expanding that interstate, that's where I can use 90% federal money, which is really local dollars that have gone to the feds and coming back to us. But in terms of how we maintain that system, that comes out of my share, the state's share, in terms of what we spend in gas taxes. And so it's owned by the federal government and the state. They have a stewardship agreement. They enforce certain standards of speed, access, safety standards. and we have to be responsible for delivering the pavement condition, the control of access, and actually operating and maintaining that system. And so I don't think Secretary Chow or the President can come and say, I want to do something different with that interstate. Likewise, I can propose doing something different with that interstate as long as it fits the national criteria and standards for an interstate.
So if a bridge had a collapse like in Italy, in Louisiana, we are responsible for the state of Louisiana?
That's different. And that's the question is, if a bridge collapsed here in Louisiana, would it be the same as Italy in terms of how they own it and operate it? I think in that case, they had a private sector operator. That would be equivalent to a private bridge here, and that might be that private entity's responsibility. If it's on the interstate, as you saw in Atlanta on 85 or in Minneapolis, there's a special program called ER funds, emergency response funds, where the federal government will come in and handle that because that was beyond the anticipation or the scope of what we would expect. And so if there's a catastrophic issue on the bridge, we will work with the federal government to get that bridge rebuilt. The vast majority of that will be paid for out of the federal government's special pot of money. Much like in emergency responses, for so many days it's 100% federal. After that, I have to match that, and that's just the national model that every state is obligated to respond to.
How would you help us understand the ownership of Nicholson Drive, which the city proposes to widen to 4 lanes?
So the question is, help explain the ownership of Nicholson. You've got several roads in the state of Louisiana that are a part of a state system, meaning it's the state's responsibility to operate, maintain those roads. And we've got about 6,000 miles of road on that 16,000 mile system that serve no statewide purpose. That is not a part of an evacuation route, is not a part of a freight corridor, is not a part of the interstate system. Miles that might be a residential community. And so they serve a better purpose in local ownership, and that is a road that we've identified to work with Baton Rouge to hand off Nicholson to them with a road transfer for them to make decisions about how that road is used, whether it's a road diet, whether it's access issues, whether it's signalization issues. Those are standards that they can determine in that transfer, but right now it's still a state road. Yes?
Isn't it a major access and egress point for the interstate?
The question was, is Nicholson a major access and ingress and egress to the interstate? The answer is yes. And at most intersections of the interstate, you have what's called a control of access that only gets you to a certain point off of that interstate, and then that road can transfer ownership or it can transfer its utility. And it's not necessary that we have the entire road as part of our state system. Yes, sir.
It's been maybe a month and some change since the Essen widening project was finished. Last week, there was major flooding on that street. Concern about that, or is it similar to what we saw earlier in the summer on South Acadian?
So the question is there a concern about the flooding on Essen? About a month ago, I guess, you had a special event or a significant event of rain. In any part of Louisiana, a rain of 3 to 4 inches in such a short period of time can overwhelm any system. And so the question is that something that concerns us? Absolutely, it concerns us. And that's why you see us investing up to $20 million in statewide flood control for a statewide program compared to $8 million we had done the year before. Public Works is something that is huge in terms of where it operates and how it operates and where the problems exists, because you simply move it to another location if you don't do the entire system. And so I think a big portion of what we see here in Baton Rouge and other parts of Louisiana is an overwhelmed system of pumps and drainage capacity based on the speed at which the rainfall is going to fall and where it has to go. I do not think that that is the norm, that every time there's any moniker of rain, there's a backup that's going to occur. And I think that's just the nature of public works and infrastructure. I don't think any system could ever be built to withstand what God and Mother Nature might have for that system at any given point in time. And so we continue to monitor it and manage it and work with Baton Rouge for what it's worth to help ensure that folks maintain access in any rainfall event. And you see the state spending a significant amount of money to look at watershed management so we move water more smartly or in a much more effective and meaningful way.
Has a lack of money for your department possibly equivalent to the reason why these systems are overwhelmed? They're old.
No, the question is a lack of money the reason for that? I don't think that it's just a lack of money. I think it's an overwhelming nature of flood control and drainage structures that were built when the interstate might have been built or when a road was built 40 or 50 years ago, and we have to continue to maintain that. The cost of construction has increased 15 to 20%, and the value of the gas tax has reduced about 50%. And if that was my personal income, there'd be things I wouldn't be doing at home today because of that gap between the need and the decrease in the value of the dollar I have. And so when you look at interstates, when you look at every state road, and you look at local drainage structures, because I don't think it's unique to the state, we've built a tremendous amount of capacity that we do not have the resources perhaps to maintain to the level of acceptance that the public might want. We can go out and clean that drain once a month. Is that going to be enough? Maybe, maybe not. We can clean it once a year. Is it enough? Maybe it isn't. So I don't know that it's a lack of resources. It's a matter of the demand growing so significantly that I don't know that you'll ever have enough resources to spend on that. Yes, sir.
Treasurer Schroeder has described the capital outlay budgeting process as being, quote, badly broken and, quote, constituting blackmail by not just Governor Edwards, but all his predecessors too. So I don't mean to infer that it's just Governor Edwards. What is your comments with regard to the capital outlay budgeting process and his commentary?
The question is about capital outlay and its effectiveness and the Treasurer's comments. I won't comment on the Treasurer's comments about that. I will tell you, I am grateful that this governor for the first time said, I'm going to put $40 million of capital outlay into the Highway Trust Fund because we needed it. I'm happy that this governor says a third of the money he's going to spend is going to be on capital projects that are state-owned, things like deferred maintenance. And so I think when you work within that system, it has its effectiveness. Likewise, I think there's a lot of stuff happening in capital outlay that's got billions of dollars on the paper, but only $300 million in the bank on an annual basis. And under anybody's formula, that will be a challenge, and it will force legislators and decision makers to have to make a decision. And so when I look at capital outlay, I don't look at it as being broken. I look at it as a tool to help me make match next year, which means if I want to draw down that extra $130 million that I'm getting today that I might not get tomorrow, I want to use some of that capital outlay to make that happen. And I realize that that's going to mean some things in capital outlay may not get funded. That's not my concern in terms of other things not getting funded. It's just a situation of how much do we really have and how best to stretch those dollars. And so when you look at capital outlay funding, you want to maximize it as best you can. And I think we're going to be in a much more tight situation where more and more is going to have to be spent on public infrastructure, because I don't know that any other project in capital outlay outside of things that are going to match Corps of Engineer funding, it's going to bring down 80% more or 90% more of what we use. And so it's just a simple math equation. I think we're going to have to use more of it, and I think this governor is committed to it and has demonstrated to us. The other issue, I think, with capital outlay is a great deal of those projects that are listed in that bill come from legislators. And many of those legislators don't want to fund those things the way they should be funded, or they're wanting to force them into that $300 million pot. And that's not a criticism. I think that's an inherited situation. And so we realize that you just don't have enough money to do everything you want, and it's forcing tough decisions.
After the floods in 2016, did FEMA or the federal government reimburse any of the state for the damage that was done to highways caused by the flood?
The answer is yes. I do not, the answer to the question being, did FEMA reimburse us for any of the damages from the floods? The answer is yes, they did reimburse us for those. Unfortunately, there's a federal model that speaks to how long it takes to fix that particular structure, and I can think of a number of bridges that we could have repaired and not made 100% of the funds because it would have taken us longer to do the repair. And so the model at FEMA is we're going to give you some money to get everything up and running within a certain time frame, and you get 100%, and then after that you're going to have to match it on a sliding scale. It's not feasible to do some of the work that needs to be done when you have such massive efforts. And as a result, I think the federal government was responsible in providing the resources they have provided to us to help make us whole from a resilience standpoint. And a hazard mitigation standpoint to try and fix that more long-term. So the answer is yes, they gave us some money. 2, it wasn't enough because of time, and we've always worked with our delegation as far back as Katrina to try and encourage them to make a real investment in the repair itself and not time constrain that based on a federal budget or a federal calendar year. Yes, sir.
Earlier you mentioned the Highland project on I-10.
Great project, Highland and 73.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. It's moving into another phase starting tonight, some closures or whatever for the project to move forward. How does it make you feel, if I also correct me if I'm wrong on this, you mentioned that was one of the many projects that's been on the list for 20 years. How does it make you feel to see that this is moving forward pretty much under your watch?
The question was, how does it feel to see all of the exciting construction that you have? This morning I woke up and I live off of Louisiana Avenue in Lafayette, and I got on Evangeline Thruway and I saw a massive widening of about $183 million going from I-49 to the Chaffalot Basin, original pavement. We're going to reduce our very poor pavement from 2% to less than 1% when that project is finished. There's another one in the middle that's coming through I'll tell you about in a second. Then I get to the Chaffalot Basin Bridge where we're repairing that bridge as you see it today under traffic. And then I get to Washington Street where we broke ground about a month ago on a new off-ramp that's going to ease that merge on Washington. And then I get to Highland that we're closing at night to put girders up for that structure about 10 days, and it's going to go from Highland to 73 and save about 15 minutes for the daily commute going and coming. And it does 2 things. It validates that the department has been wise at what we were working toward, because many of those projects had preliminary work done. And then it's exciting and validating for me as a public servant to do those things that the public wants done and have asked about. And so I get excited when I travel through there, except when there's an accident or when there's distraction or when people complain about closing Highland at night, because I have to close it at some point to do it. I can't do it during the daytime. And so that's part of the job, that's part of the process. I'm excited about that. But it's just encouraging to see that work, because if nothing else, it shows the public, if you gave us additional dollars, we're in a process and in a position to be able to spend it very quickly and very efficiently with as much innovation and professionalism as you would have anywhere else in the country. So I'm very proud of the department and our sector of engineering and contractors that help deliver these projects, because we're only a part of that equation. We help get it right, and we go to the private sector and they work with us. And we like when they get things done early and on time and with innovation and under budget for all those engineers and contractors that are watching.
We have time for one more brief question.
John in the back.
All right, I was wondering, at one time there was a lot of talk about doing a bypass from Baton Rouge down to the Sunshine Bridge. And I know that a lot of that roadway would have to be improved dramatically. You have to go around Blackburn or figure out a way there. But is that still a viable and all consideration, or is the Sunshine Bridge actually acceptable?
Well, the Sunshine Bridge is acceptable. The question is a bypass in West Baton Rouge still a solution that would lead from I-10, I think, down to the Sunshine Bridge as an alternative? That is an alternative, but I also think it's probably one of the more expensive alternatives to get there with the least amount of impact compared to needing a new structure south of the existing old new bridge. Instead of the new bridge, it's the old new bridge. So the challenge is going to be whether it's a new bridge in West Baton Rouge to East Baton Rouge or to Iberville or going down there, is how do you get traffic from I-10 in a meaningful way to that location? And where will they want to go? Is the Sunshine Bridge too far, perhaps, for the folks that we're going to detour off of I-10 to come across this potential toll structure to get across to I-10 down in Ascension? Or further down. And so I would suggest to you, our plan is for a new structure and to get you down there as quickly and as effectively as we can, in addition to what the Sunshine Bridge provides today.
I think that's all our time.
Well, thank you all for listening. I appreciate your invitation.